All right, so first things first, we're gonna go over the demo. The hard part of the build is definitely getting everything out of the way. So we're gonna pull the leaf springs out, which you've seen that Jacob's already done here. We're gonna go ahead and cut back the heat shield that goes over the exhaust. So cut out the section just before the tank cross member. That way you can put a bolt to hold it nice so it doesn't rattle all the way back to the end of the truck. Sometimes those Torx bits have a habit of stripping out. They're kind of old. A lot of these trucks have seen some abuse. So drop the spare tire. If you need to, you can cut the head off of those to get them out of the way. So another thing we like to do is we like to cut out this channel right here above the frame. So that's going to be where your high clearance notch goes. If you're doing a high clearance notch, I would recommend cutting it from about where that opening is out. I like to leave the center section of the bed in. Typically, I'm not lowering the truck 6 inches in the rear, so I don't necessarily need this to be removed. But if you are, you will need to remove the full channel. This high clearance notch kit with the shorter bump stop will allow this to travel all the way until it touches the sheet metal under the bed. If you're not going to lower the truck that much though, I think it's really advantageous to keep that channel in there. It just keeps the bed floor a lot more rigid. The other thing is that high clearance notch is gonna go all the way up and touch the underside of the bed. So it will actually support the bed floor and the channel will keep it rigid from there. So one thing to do before you get rid of this channel entirely is going to be line up our template that we send with all the high clearance notch kits and mark everything out. While you're cutting everything, you might as well cut this as well. So get this lined up, get this frame registering hole lined up, get this set up with the channel, and this lines up with where the frame is sectioned from the factory. Mark this out. It goes pretty much to the top edge of the frame, but you retain the top so you don't actually cut the frame entirely in half. And then just go ahead and mark some of these holes. Now you should be pretty much ready to go. You need the frame to be supported on both sides when you're about to cut that much out of it. You can, if you're doing it on the ground, you'll want to have a jack stand in the front and a jack stand in the rear. The bed will also kind of help keep everything straight, but I would also recommend you only do side to side. Even with everything supported, it's still being bolted to the bed. You don't want anything moving out of the factory spec. One thing I like to do in the very beginning, and it's another reason why I mark out the holes on this to also kind of help make sure that nothing moves from the factory spec. But I'll go ahead and punch 2 of the holes. Typically, I'll take the farthest 2 apart. So one of the things I wanted to point out on these high clearance notches is this particular alignment plate right here. We did include that initially so that you could use that and these two flange head bolts to line everything up when you put everything together, and that'll keep everything straight. But as time went on, we found out that sometimes it's easier to just leave everything loose, do the outside plate first, and bolt everything together. So you're more than welcome to use this plate. Sometimes it can cause some complications. You have to notch the frame a little bit more, etc. But it's totally up to the end user. All right, so we got the outer frame plate on. We got most all the bolts in and through with all the spacers on. You notice the front two holes haven't been drilled yet. That's because I like to get everything bolted up and tight first. And those front two bolts don't use the spacers because they actually sandwich the only part of the frame that is boxed. So we'll go ahead, get the other side bolted up. It will tighten everything on this side of the frame, and then we'll run the drill bit through the other side and put the last two bolts in. So another thing I like to do, just on some of these trucks where, like, this is a buddy of mine, so he's gonna be towing a boat, putting a lot of heavy stuff in it. One extra measure I like to do is burn it in, kind of like a traditional notch. Even though you already have 11 half-inch bolts holding this thing on here with crush spacers and 2 3/8 plates, we're gonna go ahead and heat up the powder coat right here, knock it off with a wire wheel, and then later in the build, once everything's all together, we'll put a nice MIG weld on it and touch it up with some paint.